Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is probably the worst video we have to make every single week, but I have to talk about these guys that are kind of falling apart right at the wrong time, starting with Gus Edwards. Now, Gus Edwards, kind of easy to see coming, right, in that this is a running back that simply was living off of rushing touchdowns. Now, there is definitely a reason why you can be optimistic about the rushing volume in Baltimore. This is a phenomenal offense. This is a team that's going to have a lot of rushing touchdowns go around. But if you are looking at the percentage of points coming from Gus Edwards' overall profile, Gus Edwards this year has scored 60 fantasy points off of rushing touchdowns. He has scored 59 fantasy points off of rushing yards, and he has scored 23 fantasy points in a full PPR format off of all his receiving production. Now, if you break it down and look at it like this and understand that the most volatile statistic out of these three from a player-to-player perspective, from a week-to-week perspective, a season-to-season perspective, will be the touchdown efficiency. So yeah, the second Gus Edwards does not score a touchdown is the second he legitimately gives you nothing. You have a total of 37 yards and 1 reception from a running back that is averaging fewer than a reception per game. Now, to go along with this, you're seeing the floor now with Gus Edwards if he does not score, but the usage is trending in the wrong direction as well. If you look at the underlying snaps in this graph from PFF, you'll see that Keaton Mitchell sees the majority of snaps on all downs. Keaton Mitchell plays 32 snaps compared to Gus Edwards at 19, compared to Justice Hill at 19. Keaton Mitchell plays the majority of early downs. Justice Hill plays the majority of third downs and all of the 2-minute drill. So going forward, I want to reiterate, you cannot trust any Baltimore Raven running back. Even if Keaton Mitchell looks like he's the guy now, the reality of the situation is if you're in a 3-man running back by committee, where it's kind of a 4-man committee with Lamar Jackson taking rushing production as well, it is very difficult to get excited about any of these players. Now, I do want to stay in the same game, and I want to go over and look at Austin Ekeler just for a bit, because with Ekeler, this is a running back that you thought was going to give you the insane floor as a receiver, but so far this season, he has 29 receptions. And this is considering that you have no Mike Williams. This is considering that Quentin Johnston has turned into an absolute pumpkin, or I guess he always was a pumpkin. And it doesn't really look to be getting any better for Austin Ekeler. Not to mention that you have viral clips on Twitter going out of Austin Ekeler just not having any juice left. Austin Ekeler cannot accelerate. Austin Ekeler's not hitting that second gear. And that's why if we go through and look at what we have had outside of week 1, the longest run for Austin Ekeler, week 2 was 6 yards. Week 3, 6 yards. Week 4 is 7 yards. Then you have 20, 17, 37 in this past week 6. You have an aging running back that doesn't have as large of a role as a receiver as you initially thought he would. At the same time, the overall offense is a little bit worse than expected. Now, while I want to say that Austin Ekeler is falling down rankings considerably, I'm going to go through and try to figure out exactly where this guy should be valued is a little bit of a tall task. I mean, if we head over to flockfantasy.com, just look at the community rankings right now and seeing if you've had any real update to Austin Ekeler after this game. Ekeler currently still is sitting at 8, but I mean, honestly, I would say Ekeler probably should fall behind Kelsey. Ekeler should probably fall behind Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Travis Etienne, Jonathan Taylor. I would say it's hard to rank Austin Ekeler as a top 3 running back going forward. It's going to be closer to RB5. Now, going over to Dalton Schultz, this is a tight end that I was loving the production in the middle of the year from a best ball perspective. I drafted an embarrassing amount of Dalton Schultz this year. What's really funny is I was the dummy going out there and drafting Devin Singletary and Dalton Schultz in these drafts and not drafting Tank Dell and Nico Collins, which of course I wish I was. But nonetheless, I mean, the usage for Schultz falling off a cliff here, this is going to be something that I want to monitor through the week. I've tried to find any report I can regarding a Dalton Schultz injury. I can't find anything here, but you have 29 snaps for Dalton Schultz out of a potential 60. So he plays pretty much about 50% of the snaps. And sometimes you'll see this from a tight end where if it's a heavy package, if it's an obvious rush down, they're not going to be out there, but they're still going to be running almost every route. But no, here you have 22 routes run for Dalton Schultz. out of 46 that were possible. So less than 50% from a route participation standpoint. Brevin Jordan has a role. Eric Saubert, I don't even know if we're saying that correctly. Has a role as well. And looks like you just simply can't trust Dalton Schultz back-to-back weeks here with 3 or fewer targets. Even though earlier in the year, the man was operating with a pretty large role in this really good offense. Now let's go over and let's look at James Conner real quick, ladies and gentlemen. And James Conner's a running back that I was the dummy coming out and saying to buy low on him last week, saying, oh, okay, well, look at the historical usage. He is going to get used somewhat as a receiver. This should be a better offense going forward. Well, the offense falls apart against the Rams. And most concerningly here, if you're looking at the running back usage, while James Conner does get everything at the goal line, while James Conner does get the majority of snaps on early downs, in the 2-minute drill, Amari DeMercado sees every single snap. On third down, DeMercado sees 8 snaps. Michael Carter sees 4. Now, my initial reaction is, this game was not even a football game. The Arizona Cardinals got completely boat raced. To look at the underlying running back usage is maybe a little bit useless, and maybe this is not predictive of what we should expect going forward. However, even if I want to say that, in the back of my mind, it's probably just because I'm remembering that last week I had this guy as a buy low candidate. And yeah, he has 5 targets this game, but you can't really comfortably rely on any type of receiving volume if ultimately at the end of the day, this is a spot where you have 0 snaps on third down and you have 0 snaps in the 2-minute drill. And this offense does not look great at this time. Now, for James Conner this week, Underdog has him at 61.5 rushing yards for his pick'em. He's still going to have the rushing production. It's kind of just difficult to project him out as that receiver now. And of course, if you wanted to say, Mason, there's no way he hit 61.5 rushing yards, you can go take the lower than on Underdog Fantasy. Promo code FLOCK going to get you a 100% deposit match, plus our rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers, and a Dak Prescott special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard with code FLOCK. But let's go over and let's look at what we have here with DeAndre Hopkins. And that with Hopkins, this is a wide receiver that is now at back-to-back weeks with only 5 targets. And this is really concerning, right? Because right when Will Levis took over, you had the 3 receiving touchdowns against Atlanta for 128 receiving yards. And then immediately after, while we did have Hopkins on our sell-high list, still, he was seeing volume, right? The week after, he had 11 targets. The week after that, he had 9, but you're looking at just the absolute inefficiency of DeAndre Hopkins in this offense with 9 targets, 27 receiving yards, 11 targets, 60 receiving yards. So far this season, 83 targets for about 700 receiving yards. A catch rate that's about 50%. And if you look at the underlying usage here, these snaps have fallen off a cliff for DeAndre Hopkins, even with Treylon Burks out. I would assume, no Treylon Burks. That means DeAndre Hopkins going to be what? 90% of the snaps played in Tennessee? 95? No, not even close. DeAndre Hopkins now is hovering about 50% of the snaps played for the Tennessee Titans here. This is a wide receiver that I think that there's no way you can go out there and trust him right now as like a top 24 option until we at least see the usage start trending in the opposite direction. But let's move over to our next guy here. And I just want to touch base with the Cincinnati Bengals, and that I was thinking Joe Mixon and Jamar Chase were must-start options this week. Y'all know Jamar Chase had one of my favorite pick'ems on Underdog Fantasy. We were going with more than 64.5 receiving yards for Chase. Now, he does get there. He has 81 receiving yards, but the thing is, if you look at how that happened, very unpredictable. You had 2 balls where Jake Browning dropped back, throw over the middle, the ball got tipped, popped up in the air, and what you typically see, obviously, is, wild ball, this is leading to an interception. It seems like this is the majority of interceptions down in the NFL is a tip ball and it falls into the defensive back's hands. But no, Jamar Chase found himself in the right place at the right time. But ultimately, if you take those random plays out of this game, you're really instead looking at Jamar Chase with like 2 receptions for 40 receiving yards this past week. We kind of got lucky that we hit on that underdog pick'em. And underlying this, you go back to what we had 2 weeks ago with Joe Burrow going down at the beginning of the game. You had Jamar Chase seeing only 12 receiving yards in that contest. And you have to keep in mind, these are games with no T. Higgins, right? So you have no T. Higgins. Naturally, you're going to get the expanded role for Jamar Chase. And Chase is hopefully just going to be a straight up vacuum in this offense. However, that really has not been the case here. And it is one of the more frustrating things to look at. And especially as we project this going forward, when we get T. Higgins back in, it's going to be very difficult to see what to expect with Chase. So while previously we were saying, oh, Jamar Chase is just like a younger Devontae Adams, right? And you can kind of see that with the Flock Fantasy community rankings right now. You have Jamar Chase back-to-back with Kyron Williams and only 2 spots ahead of Devontae Adams. I wouldn't mind if you wanted to move Michael Pittman ahead of Jamar Chase. I mean, now Chase is behind Puka. He's behind Tank Dell. I mean, my lizard brain wants to come out here and scream, oh, Chase is a great value. Go get Chase at that. I mean, in reality, I don't necessarily know if we can say that. And going over to Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon does see every single snap here, but the issue is, if this offense is only scoring 1 touchdown per week, I mean, you have 8 carries for 16 rushing yards this week with Joe Mixon. He does kind of somewhat save his day from a receiving standpoint. He has 44 receiving yards, but only off of 2 targets. Browning did go out there and run the ball a little bit. So what also may end up being a concern is if you just naturally have a lower checkdown rate in this offense. Now, I want to cover someone who had a horrible week. Saquon Barkley, horrendous week against the Pats. This is what you're going to come to expect with Saquon Barkley. Barkley should not move in your rankings. I mean, yes, 2 weeks ago, blow-up game against Washington where the man goes out there, he has 140 total yards and multiple receiving touchdowns. This week, you have a total of 49 yards. Obviously, no receiving touchdowns. Saquon Barkley falls in the same mold of what you're going to have with someone like Josh Jacobs. This will be a running back that gets pretty much every single touch out of his backfield. This will be a running back that, while he does get every single touch out of his backfield, is still playing in arguably the worst offense in the NFL. If you look at the implied team totals for offenses this next week, the New York Giants are down there with the New York Jets. Nothing has changed here with Saquon Barkley. He's a bell cow running back in a horrendous offense. And if you look at the flockfantasy.com community rankings, right now you'd have Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs essentially back-to-back on this list with Breece Hall, which is very fitting, right? Because all these are 3-down running backs in some of the worst offenses in the NFL. Now, I want to go and talk about Cooper Kupp. And the thing with Cooper Kupp is it's very difficult for me to talk on the situation because I have no idea. Kupp, another horrendous week where you have 5 targets, 3 receptions, 18 receiving yards. Now, I'm going through trying to find anything I can on Twitter, trying to find anything I can from anybody, seeing like, oh, is Kupp injured? And yeah, you have some fantasy doctors coming out here saying, oh yeah, Cooper Kupp's injured. Cooper Kupp's not the thing is, does it matter, right? The fact of the matter is he's just not producing. He's not someone we can trust. Whether we can blame it on an injury, whether we can blame it on the offense, whether you can blame it on the talent, whether you can blame it on the age, at the end of the day, it just comes down to fantasy points. And if we don't have a clear path to these fantasy points turning around anytime soon, it is hard to get excited about him because you look at both Puka and Kupp in a game where the Rams dropped 37 points. They do legitimately nothing. This now marks the 5th straight week for Cooper Kupp, fewer than 50 receiving yards. I was thinking that he was someone that we had to start this week, looking at the previous 3, saying, oh, okay, well, Stafford was hurt for 2, Kupp was hurt for the other. People are telling us it's going to be good to go. Let's believe them. I mean, I don't know. Where the hell am I supposed to rank Cooper Kupp this next week? I mean, even if he does get in full practices, right now Cooper Kupp is down to 40 on the flockfantasy.com community rankings, but I'd imagine that Kupp probably falls further than this. I mean, this is the morning after this game, so as we get more data points, I expect to see Kupp falling probably behind guys like Debo, probably, I mean, maybe even behind like Garrett Wilson, falling into the 50s, 60s in these rankings. And well, I previously thought, oh, okay, maybe he's going to have a bounce back if he's healthy. When is this guy going to be healthy? But I think that's all I have for you with this video. Again, thank you so much for being a member of the flock. If you have not done so already, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And if you wanted to say, well, Mason, of course, James Conner is going to have fewer than 61.5 rushing yards, you can find that link on Underdog Fantasy. Promo code FLOCK, 100% deposit match, plus our rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers, and a Dak Prescott special pick of more than less than half a total yard for Thursday night. So make sure you take advantage of it with code FLOCK. But thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. I really do appreciate you. I really hope you have a great day, and really hope we get to see you out in the live stream later tonight.